Hello, horror fan, best friends and ghoulish knights, and welcome to the 38th episode of Murders with Mertens. I am your host, Joe, and this is a podcast about horror. American remakes of Japanese horror, folk horror, body horror, sci-fi horror, the horror-adjacent thrillers, the psychologically terrifying, scary films in general. Each episode, I sit down with a guest and discuss one of their favorite scary films so that we can gush about everything that makes it just so damned cool. Viewers, thank you for the support. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you are so inclined. It all helps to get the word out and bring some much needed love to this little podcast. Audio listeners, the show is also available on podcast services around the world like Apple Podcasts and Spotify, so don't forget to leave a rating when you stop by. 5 stars is always appreciated. But enough of all that housekeeping, because today I have the privilege of welcoming for her Murders with Mertens debut, my good friend, Kate Matlin Remmer. Kate, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's so great to be here and get to catch up with you.
Oh, I know. It's been a hot minute. And, we've talked about doing this for a while as well. I'm sorry that I probably sound like shit. I am a little bit under the weather at the moment, but we're going to make this happen. We got to be committed here. I'm glad to finally have you on. We've been friends for a very long time at this point, and it's the kind of thing where the movie we're about to talk about, I couldn't think of anybody else that I would want to talk about this film with. We definitely have history with this film, and let's just get right out there that today's film is 2002's The Ring, directed by Gore Verbinski and written by Aaron Kruger, and of course being based on the 1998 Japanese film Ring, released as Ringu here in the States. Not going to omit the amazing Hans Zimmer score as well, because that is a huge part of what makes this film good. Kate, you're one of the biggest Ring fans that I know. Why The Ring?
I love The Ring because it's such a poetic movie. I think just start to finish, right? The music, the colors, the sound editing, the fact that the film within the film is so poetic and artistic. I think so much attention to detail was paid in this movie. And even though it was a commercial horror film, it's just such a pretty film.
Oh,
So
yeah. Yeah. It's an absolute pleasure to look at. The color grading is super cool. You get that sort of blue, green, gray tone throughout
yeah.
this whole movie. It's very cohesive with that. But yeah, you're right. It's just so just picturesque, between the Japanese maple and the shots of the water flowing around the stones, and not to mention the video that's in the film itself that looks like like a Mark Romanek 9 Inch Nails video. Just there's so much good in this, and it's part of that big J horror remake boom of the aughts. And probably one of the best, if not the best, of out of all of those. There's some stinkers in there. Nobody needed to remake The Grudge. Not a fan of that remake. Pulse, also not so good of a remake. But there were so many good J horror films in that era to begin with. I've covered Audition on this show early on. Oh, that one's a lot of fun. But we were talking before we started recording about one of those After Dark Horror Fest films, Reincarnation. Yeah, and I just started thinking about that as I was rewatching this and rewatching Ringu earlier in the week. And it's so funny that popped into both of our heads, because I remember we had that subscription to Blockbuster, the disc version of that, similar to old school Netflix. And we used to get those After Dark films all the time. We tore through those back in the day.
And it's funny because Reincarnation's the one that stands out in my mind that I remember very clearly.
Yeah, I was just looking up where you can get that. It's not streaming for free anywhere, but to buy it on I think on Amazon, it's only about $6.50 or something like that. I'm so tempted.
Really?
Yeah.
I honestly think I still have the DVD from Blockbuster in the case.
Okay. Okay. Oh, it might have been on one of those sales where they were selling all their previously
Exactly.
viewed ones.
Yeah.
That's neat. That's
Mhm.
neat. Yeah, I just that's one where I would love to rewatch that again sometime soon. So I
You're
might make
welcome to
that
borrow it.
happen. Okay. Well, yeah, well, that might work too.
Mhm.
Oh, God. But yeah, there were a lot of fun films out of this time period. This is one of those where when you think about the conceit of the film, when you think about the time period that it came from, VHS was kind of on its way out at that point already.
Yeah. Mhm.
And, disc based home media was definitely already a big thing. And
Mhm.
you had early flip phones in this, like I can't remember, was it Motorola that made the StarTAC?
Motorola.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But I remember that being a very specific early flip phone, and that
Mhm.
was featured kind of prominently in this. And just answering machines and everything else in this film that feels so dated, and yet the movie continues to look just incredible.
Yeah.
Um,
It definitely stands the test of time, and if
yeah,
anything, it takes people like us back, you know,
yeah,
it's a very nostalgic feeling for people who grew up at that time.
yeah, yeah. It's funny because people talk about horror films and how in this modern age they just don't seem like they should work because of a lot of the trappings of modern life,
Mhm.
and how you really have to figure out situations that are so different than
Mhm.
the settings of older horror films to make them work. But
Mhm.
I don't know, this one just continues to work just fine.
It
uh,
does.
Love it. But yeah, why don't we kind of kick things off here? We start off with this treatment of the DreamWorks logo that's super cool in that it's all glitched out, like
Mhm. Like
you
the
know, like
video.
yeah, like a VHS tape playing on an old CRT TV.
Mhm.
Um, and we're introduced to two teenagers, Katie and Becca. Katie, of course, played by Amber Tamblyn, daughter of
Hamlin from West Side Story.
yes, and Twin Peaks. Uh,
Mhm.
Dr. Jacoby, lest we forget.
Yep.
But yeah, they're just kind of hanging out on this rainy night, kind of bored out of their minds. And they're not able to really find anything to watch on TV. And Katie starts sort of rambling about all the radio waves flying around and what that's doing to us. And well, Becca decides to one up her and start talking about this videotape that kills you when you watch it. Yeah, have you heard of this? And it's right off the jump. It's not even 2 minutes into the film, and we're already talking about what this movie is all about. I appreciate that they get going right away.
Mhm.
Um, and she's looking a little concerned, Katie. She's like, she asks, what kind of tape? And it's like you're watching someone else's nightmare. And as soon as it's over, the phone rings and someone knows you've watched it and you will die in 7 days. Um, yeah. Katie starts freaking out a little bit, asking where Becca heard about it, and then admits that she's watched it. And yeah, Becca's like, bullshit, right? Katie explains that she went away with her boyfriend and his friends the prior weekend. And of course, Becca doesn't care about anything that they're talking about other than the fact that she went away with her boyfriend for the weekend.
Right.
She thought that she was at home. Um, but yeah, Katie keeps going, talking about how they were trying to record a football game and they got, well, something else. And then the phone rang after they watched it. Uh, then, of course, Katie starts gagging. Becca starts freaking out. And then, of course, Katie reveals, yeah, she's pulling one over on her. And
Mhm.
they kind of fight a little bit, laughing. But then the phone starts ringing. And yeah, oh, the look on Katie's face. Um, you can tell that what she's talking about is indeed real at this point.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think such a good job of getting us a little freaked out early on that
Mhm.
this isn't just like a chain letter type of thing. This isn't just an urban legend. No, no, she's very concerned. So they
Mhm.
slowly make their way downstairs and Becca just kind of not buying it. And she's like, oh, fuck this. And she just picks up the phone and she looks super concerned. Slowly passes the phone to Katie, who takes a beat before asking, hello? And it's her mom. And she's all pissed at Becca, who walks away, saying, hey, ask your mom where she keeps her Vicodin. And, like teenagers do. And she kind of works her way through this exasperated phone call with her mother. I'm not sure where Becca walked off to at this point because we don't see her again until much later in this film. But eventually this exasperated Katie gets off the phone with her mom, and that's when the TV in the family room pops on. It's static. And she kind of nervously looks around and slowly approaches, grabs the remote, tells Becca, it's not funny. Stop screwing around. She turns it off, turns her back on the TV. And of course, that's when it pops on again. This is very effective. I like this quite a bit. Ultimately, she drops down on her knees in front of the TV, staring at the static. I love the way that the shot is composed because it's so much of the curve of the CRT in the frame in front of her face. It's just very cool. And she's staring at this thing, and eventually she just grabs the plug and pulls it out of the wall. And, of course, it's one of those old homes with crappy wiring and it sparks like crazy. And she kind of rises back up and stares at the reflection in the dark screen. And this is where you see this presence behind her just kind of shift and fly away. And it's not, clear what it is. I think in the Japanese version, I think you end up seeing
see an image.
Yeah, you see somebody there. But I kind of like the way how they handle that in this. I think as effective as the original film is, and I love it, and I love the cast and the performances and everything, but there's some little bits that just are a little rough that are just a little bit more polished in this one. I'm not at all trying to shit on the original film, but it's one of the things that makes this such a fun, effective remake.
I agree. I think the American film leaves a little more to the imagination as it goes along. It sort of builds up and lets you imagine what it could be, and then it delivers, right? So
yeah. Yep, agreed. So yes, she turns around again. I think she might call it to Becca again at some point. We get the little fake out with the fridge door swinging open. She rushes up and closes it, and she kind of hears something in the distance, and she ends up running up those stairs. And I feel like this just feels a bit like an homage to the original A Nightmare on Elm Street with those stairs, just the way the shot's composed. But and we get the little callback of the stairs later at the wake. But she goes up those stairs in a big hurry. But when she hits the upper floor, she slows down really quick because we see water pooling out from under her bedroom door. She walks very slowly up to it. It's one of those old school glass doorknobs, and water is dripping off of it. And you get that kind of like musical cues, soundscape from the video that we don't know is from the video at this point playing.
Like a bird kind of squawking or something.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It's very kind of ethereal. And she just keeps approaching, sort of steps into the water and opens up the door, and we see immediately on the TV screen in her bedroom an image of the well, and then the perspective shot of some force rushing up into her face. And that's it. She's donezo. Cut to static, right? And And also cut to a little boy drawing in an empty classroom with probably a black crayon. We get some very aggressive footsteps and a one-sided argument approaching. You can only hear a little bit of the argument, but there's a callback to what's being said a little bit later when we meet the person from the other end. The actor that plays Aiden, the little boy, went to UCLA at 13 and then Harvard Law at 18.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's wild.
He's an attorney that I think he's got some position in the House of Representatives now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure he's in the background in the Brett Kavanaugh hearing.
Oh, I'll have to check.
Yeah.
That's surprising.
Yeah, it's he definitely left acting behind in the late aughts, but yeah.
Very talented when he was an actor.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you imagine going to Harvard Law at 18?
No, that's wild.
Oh, that's very clearly this kid's a prodigy. And just beyond his years in this role. I don't know what age he's supposed to be, but dang. So yes, Rachel, Naomi Watts, she bursts into this classroom cursing and of course immediately apologizes. Aiden just gets up and tells her he'll wait in the car. I think he clearly knows that his teacher wants to speak with her. He was hanging out because, of course, the girl from earlier in the film, Katie, that's his cousin, Rachel's niece. She was basically his after-school childcare, and yeah, Rachel's still figuring that out because she's a single mom, and this is kind of rough at the moment. But yeah, the teacher wants to take a moment and speak to her, and yeah. They talk about the niece's death and how, she's trying to find a replacement. The teacher's not super concerned about that. Take your time, she says. But ultimately, what she is concerned about is Aiden and how, he may be trying to reach out about this. They talk about how he's kind of a quiet kid, how, he's not the kind of person who necessarily would. And then the teacher's like, but he may be reaching out in other ways. And she says she's really concerned about what he's been drawing. And she shows these, Crayola drawings to Rachel. And yeah, they're a little disturbing. They're a little dark. It's images of his dead cousin, and she's like, well, this is just him processing what happened. This is just him working it out. And the teacher's like, yeah, but he drew these last week. Yeah, yes, that's a little spooky. So yeah, then from there we're driving home in the rain and Rachel's just kind of staring at him in the rear view and he gives her this what? Yeah. And if we didn't mention, this is set in Seattle, and the rain is a huge fixture in this film. Always a fan of sympathetic weather, that's for sure. But
agreed.
Yeah, it's just the shots of the rain on windshields and windows and so on throughout this film is just gorgeous. Just one more beautiful bit of this film. She tucks him in that night. He makes this comment about not having enough time, and she thinks that it has more to do with, her and work and, how she's been busy lately. And he's like, no, we don't have enough time before we die. And, ooh, this is an uncomfortable conversation here. And he brings up that Katie knew how much time she had left. She told him that he was going to die, or that she was going to die. And Rachel's just kind of floored. And he just rolls over and he says, good night, Rachel. Little shit. He makes all these little comments like that just knock people off of their pedestals there in these moments where they feel that they're, somewhat superior, like this conversation he has down the road with Noah, who we have yet to meet. But yeah, this kid's something. Cut to the next day and they're getting ready for Katie's funeral. And I love that this is just like Ringu and that,
she has her outfit prepped.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And, he's there putting his tie on and everything. And I love how this kid is clearly in early grade school and he can tie his own tie and everything.
Mhm.
Um, it's pretty cool. Maybe it's a clip on, who knows? But I choose to believe that he knows how to tie his own tie.
Mhm.
But yeah, nice callback to the original film there. And
Mhm.
they go and they take off, and we cut to the wake at Rachel's sister's house,
Mhm.
and Rachel goes and comforts her sister and
Mhm.
brother-in-law, and the sister is Ruth, the brother-in-law is Dave. Dave is clearly still in shock. She's like, how are you holding up? And he's like, I'm fine. How are you? He
Mhm.
says, he's just out of it. And then we're in the kitchen, and clearly Ruth is the stronger of the pair. And she's like, he just sleeps all day, and he's not built for this. And then she talks about how she's been talking to doctors like crazy, and it just makes no sense that this girl just dropped dead like this. Her heart stopped.
Mhm.
Um, she's just at a loss, right? And it's revealed that basically Rachel is an investigative journalist,
Mhm.
and she just really wants Rachel to see what she can dig up about all of this. Who,
Right.
Rachel doesn't really want to, but she's just sort of begging her. And
Mhm.
um,
I think this conversation was interesting too because when they're talking together, this is the first time you get to see the face of Amber Tamlin's character after she was killed.
oh yeah, that would have been a
Which
closed casket funeral, that's for sure.
yeah. And that, because you didn't really get to see that when she was killed at the beginning of the film, and that it's pretty it just stinks to your heart because it's so terrifying.
Yeah, it's pretty intense, and they've got that little musical stinger or whatever when they show the face, and it's one of those where the head of the corpse just kind of drops, and oh, it's good.
Yeah.
But yes, um, Rachel kind of heads outside to join the smokers, which are Katie's teenage friends.
Mhm.
Um, yes, to smoke herself, but also because she's like, okay, let's see what I can dig up just from them.
Mhm.
And they're discussing Becca, who had been admitted to a mental hospital over her reaction to finding Katie.
Mhm.
Um, and they don't want anything to do with Rachel, who of course just kind of worms her way into the conversation. And when they try to blow her off, she just, plays it off as them accepting her as part of the conversation. The whole thing with grabbing the one girl's cigarette to light her own and so on.
Mhm.
It's a fun touch. You can tell she is in no way a pushover.
Mhm.
And yeah, one of the friends, Adam Brody, in a tiny little role here, he brings up the tape and the dead boyfriend, Josh. And well, apparently this was a secret boyfriend, we learn. But yeah, how everybody basically died at the same time.
Right.
Meanwhile, we've got Aiden heading up to Katie's room. This is where we get the call back of the stairs as he goes
Mhm.
up, and you see her running up the stairs, that little flash.
Mhm.
Um, and he walks up to her room, and we get that shot of the water damaged hardwood outside the door. And
Mhm.
he stands in front of her TV in the dark like a little creep that he is. And we get the little flash of the presence behind him in the reflection
Mhm.
again. He turns around. Of course, there's nothing there. And he goes back to just staring at the TV. That's where his mom steps in and flips on the light. And it's like,
I think
she,
this is I think this is an interesting part too. In addition to the drawings, because it's kind of a little unspoken, but in the Japanese movie and in the book, it was clear that the child had psychic abilities, and it's a little bit unspoken in the American film. But he hasn't watched the video yet at this point, so he's like having these visions and seeing an apparition behind him, and he has no exposure to the film yet, right? So clearly,
right.
he has special abilities that other people don't.
Yeah. It's in the Japanese version. Also, his father, played by Hiroki Sanada,
Also,
He's got this psychic
exactly.
ability as well, which, yeah, I appreciate that they didn't use that for Noah in this film, but
It's sort of implied. It festers under the surface a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, mom pops in. It's like, you shouldn't be up here, in Katie's room. And he's like, yeah, it's not her room anymore. Dark, kid. That is dark. But also, again, wise beyond his years. And he steps out and she starts looking around. And yeah, she's poking through this folder where she's got all these clippings from magazines, and she's like scribbled over all the faces. And of course, we realize later that it isn't just scribbles, it's something else. But she sees all this, it's a little disturbing, and she finds again a little bit of what feels like an anachronism, or not an anachronism, but something that's just old at this point that really has no place in today's age. She finds a ticket for a photo lab, because who develops photos anymore? It's all on your phone.
That was so fun though when you were younger, and you got to wait. You were so excited to get your.
Never knew what you were gonna get, right? It was always such a gamble. But yeah, she gets that ticket stub, and we cut to the next day where she goes to the lab. She picks up the photos, and it's like your typical photos of kids fucking around on a weekend away, until you get to the photos where their faces are all distorted. And but the photos do ultimately lead her to Shelter Mountain, which is where they were staying. She does a minor amount of digging at this point through some newspapers, and she does discover that all these kids had died at the same time around 10 p.m. that Wednesday. And yeah, we cut to her at work, where she's on the phone with the medical examiner, trying to find out about the time of death for her niece. And we get her editor walking up, and he's the punctilious prick that she was talking to on the phone earlier in the film. And he's like, "You're fired." And she's like, "No, I'm not." And he's like, "Yes, you are." "No, I'm not." Because she's got too good of a story that she's working on. She's the one with all the power in this relationship, and it's awesome. And I love how when the medical examiner gets back on the phone, how she just kind of shoos him away, and he leaves with this goofy look on his face, like he's just been told off by a mom or whatever. Love it. I wish this guy would come back at some point in the film, but this is all we get of him. And yeah, we cut to the next day from here, where she's driving off to Shelter Mountain to investigate further. She gets to the office, and you get this desk clerk who's probably every single person that walks in there he's trying to do this card trick with. And he's like, "Pick a card, any card," and the typical card trick thing. And he keeps getting it wrong. And she asks about some kids that stayed there recently. It's her niece, and she's trying to figure out where she ran off to or whatever she says. And he's like, "Oh yeah, they ran off without paying. They had a ton of complaints, mostly about the TV, how they couldn't get any reception, but that's kind of the norm up there. That's why they have VCRs in all the cabins." And they look over, and there's all these janky old videotapes there. I really ought to pause that screen sometime just to see what they have in their collection, because most of them are real films, but she definitely notices just this blank videotape sitting there. And of course she gets curious. So she mentions, "You know what? I'm kind of tired. I'm going to take a nap. I'll take cabin 12. She hands him the American Express, and he goes to run the card. While he does that, she ends up snatching the tape, and she heads off to cabin 12, right? And immediately she gets into this cabin. Well, of course, after we see the Japanese maple for the first time. God, what a beautiful tree.
It is.
And she just cues that tape right up. And we see on the VCR, which, of course, for whatever reason, is not flashing 12 like it probably would be. That's a little bit after 5 at that point. And yeah, she pops in the tape. And like I said before, we get this kind of Mark Romanek style 9-inch video, 9-inch nail video, with all these disturbing images. You know, we get the chair spinning around, all the fingers wiggling around in the box. We get
on the beach,
all the fun stuff.
Yeah.
And you hear the little snippet of Samara's song that she sings. And you know, the video ends with a shot of the well and then static. And then, of course, the phone rings and she slowly picks it up. And we hear the iconic 7 days. And she runs outside into the rain and looks around like somebody was going to be standing there or something. And we just cut to Thursday, day 1. And we've got Aiden packing his own lunch and heading off to school. And meanwhile, she's just sitting on her bed looking through photos and stuff and clearly freaking the fuck out about things. Aiden outside in the pouring rain encounters Noah in the shot that, you know, perfectly mirrors the one from Ringu. Love it. And the look that they share with each other. Wow. Because Aiden's just staring daggers at Noah, and Noah has this, I don't know, kind of almost shameful look on his face. It's, you know, at this point, it's not exactly clear, although it's heavily implied what's going on there. It's not till over halfway in the film that we learn a little bit more, but yeah, they part ways, and we cut to inside where Rachel is showing Noah, who's like this photographer / videographer, Katie's photo, and how their faces are all distorted. And then she asks him to take a picture of her with this digital camera, which he does. After he finally prods her to even look up, she's like so freaked out about the situation, she can't even do that. And of course, the photo ends up all distorted, and she's like, yeah, go ahead and scroll through them. And all these selfies she had taken are also crazy distorted. And he's like, is this the same camera that was used? Like, nope. And yeah, she explains about the tape and all of that. And then he's going to watch it, but she starts to reconsider showing him the tape. Ultimately, he does wear her down enough to let him watch it, and he pops it on, and she ends up stepping outside because she just can't be there for it. And while she's waiting, she's, again, a scene that kind of mirrors the original. She's looking around at her neighbors across the street there, and they're all doing their little mundane daily life things. And, you know, ultimately this lady who had stepped out on a balcony for a cigarette, they kind of lock eyes for a second, but that's right when he finishes up and steps back outside, and he's playing it off like it's no big deal. What is it that he says? It's something along the lines of like, oh, that was very student film. It's very dismissive of what he had to see. Because of course he's got to be the cool guy, right? He's got to be, you know, big, tough guy, cool guy. And, yeah, he plays it off as being very amateurish. And of course, the phone starts ringing at this point. And they don't pick up because they're continuing to talk. And she does finally convince him to, at the very least, help her find the tape's origin. And he asks her to, yeah, go ahead and make a copy and I'll see what I can, dig up. And she steps back in and she finds that there's a message waiting on the machine. And again, the whole thing of landline and answering machine, because that just doesn't exist any longer, at least for a large portion of us. And you see her finger hover over the play button and just hesitate for a minute. And then she just deletes the message because we all know what was on that message. And then she just goes off to work, probably, where she makes a copy. And you notice on all the equipment that there's like something screwed up with the time code. The video is just messing with things. And then we move on to Friday, day 2, where she stops by Noah's loft with the copy. He explains that, yeah, the tape shouldn't exist because there's no control track. And she's like, I don't know what you're talking about here. And he's like, well, whatever made the tape would have put numbers on it that basically are like a digital signature, almost like a fingerprint. And without that, this should not exist. And at that point, they're like screwing around with some of his equipment, trying to adjust the tracking because there's something that they kind of can see off the edge of the screen, but not quite. And it's at this point where you can see them getting a little bit closer. Clearly, there was a relationship there before. And clearly, there was a little bit of like a little overbearance about some things because she is kind of pushing his boundaries there in a way that probably happened in the past. And of course, there's a little flare up there and they look at each other with this knowing look. And that's when his assistant steps into the loft and Rachel, I think she's a little upset here, just a smidge, because again, she thought that, maybe, just maybe they could have like something of a normal relationship with each other, but he's back to his old ways there. And they kind of argue a little bit. And after, of course, Rachel storms off with the copy because she doesn't want the assistant to see it. And he's like, well, you let me see it. But she's going to go do her own thing. And as far as she's concerned, he can just fuck off. So they part ways. As she steps out of his building, absentmindedly, she walks under a ladder, turns around and sees that it's just like the ladder in the video. And then some painter steps by and he's like, yo, careful, you don't need that bad luck. Yeah. We're already on to day 3 at this point. It's Saturday. We have Rachel going to visit Becca in the hospital. Becca is like terrified of seeing television screens because they have this rolling screen so that she doesn't have to look at it as she passes by the common room there in the hospital. And we go to a little side room where they can talk, and she's pretty silent, probably heavily medicated as well. She sure looks like it. Rachel is just trying every tack she possibly can to get something out of her, but doesn't get anything until Becca finally says that tells Rachel that she will show her in 4 days. And she tells her by turning her hand over and folding her thumb in and then saying in 4 days, which is a fun little touch. Boy, we sure didn't get a lot out of Becca there. But yes, she is freaked the fuck out. Let's see here. From there, we cut to Rachel using some really heavy equipment. I don't know if this is at her job. I'm assuming it is. But it's either that or it's like the local TV station or something like that. But very heavy equipment to work with this videotape. And there's this semi-abrasive person showing her, showing her how to use everything. And of course, Rachel's not really the friendliest either, but it basically tells this lady to fuck off. I need to see this alone. And
she doesn't want anyone else dying either.
Well, she's at least that considerate, but she could have at least said, this is something I'm investigating and it's some pretty not okay stuff on this film or something like that. There's ways of playing this off without being an asshole about it. So this lady's like, whatever, and bugs out, and she starts using the equipment to mess with the tracking and stretch to the edge of the film. And ultimately, first she prints out a picture of the woman that you can see brushing her hair or combing her hair rather, in this mirror. And then working with the tracking, she's able to just barely see this lighthouse at the edge. And she quickly hits the print button on this thing and everything winks out. She calls for help on the microphone. And when everything comes back on, she ends up getting to the screen that you had seen before when she and Noah were playing with the video of this fly.
Mm-hmm.
And this time around, the fly is on the outside of the screen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, of course, when the girl comes back in and interrupts her. And wow, Rachel's got a massive nosebleed. That looks thick.
It does. I will say too, I don't know if this is something you picked up on, but even before the fly, it looked like the video was interactive. So like when she
Mhm.
pans over to the lighthouse, it looks like the lighthouse is spinning. Like it's really bright and then it gets dimmer, like the light coming around and
Oh, yeah.
like focusing somewhere else. So it looks like it looks interactive, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot of this video that seems like almost more of it comes out the more the investigation goes along.
Exactly.
It
It's like a
just kind of
living,
like,
breathing video.
yeah, it changes in some ways. Yes.
Mhm.
Um, and from there, we cut to day 4, Sunday. Rachel's at the library researching lighthouses and trying to match up the one from the video. And
Mhm.
man, she hits pay dirt just about half a dozen pages into flipping through this book. I feel bad for the poor librarian that helped her gather all these books,
I know.
but
Didn't take
yeah,
long.
it's no, not at all. Apparently it's what is it, Moscow Island. And she goes from there back to work where she's just Googling some stuff and she ends up finding some very, very poorly photoshopped images of this group of women. And we've got Anna Morgan, the woman from the video. And she starts learning about the sad, sad history of the island and the Morgans, about all these drowned horses that essentially committed suicide, and Anna Morgan's suicide herself. And, Rachel finds herself as she's looking through all these things, she's absentmindedly scribbling over Anna's photo, just like Katie had done. And we move on from here to Monday, day 5. We're not even halfway through the film, and we're clipping through these days very quickly.
Mhm.
And it's the morning of day 5. Noah's at a bodega or whatever getting cigarettes, and the clerk just says to him, "You're gonna die." It's just unsettling, the tone and the fact that she's just dead-eyed staring at him saying this. He's like, "Excuse me?" And she goes into the story about her cousin or whatever getting on the patch and quitting smoking ultimately. And he pays for his stuff, but happens to look up at the TV in the upper corner of the shop that shows the security camera footage, and his face is all distorted.
Mhm.
And he gets a little freaked out and bugs out of there. Move on to Rachel returning home and scaring the shit out of the babysitter. And from there, the conversation is basically just how adult that Aiden ultimately is. How she goes to tuck him in. He's already under the covers. She wanted to read him a bedtime story. He read her a bedtime story. He's learning very adult words like conundrum.
Right.
So she pays her. She takes off. Cut to Rachel on the phone with her sister. She's trying to arrange for her to watch Noah or Aiden for a couple of days while she goes off and investigates some things. And immediately, she starts. Rachel starts gagging to death on some water and coughs up like an EKG electrode that's wire is wrapped in human hair.
Mhm. This was such a striking scene, like, totally unexpected and terrifying and disgusting.
Yep. And you can hear her sister Ruth calling out to her.
Mhm.
Of course, when she finishes gagging this thing up, you look at the phone and there's water pouring out of the earpiece.
Mhm.
Um, then, she's calling out to Aiden and walking through the hall, and she opens what is probably supposed to be his door, only
Mhm.
to find the little girl sitting with her back to her in this chair that's just in this pool of water. And as she walks up to her, of course, this decayed hand reaches up and grabs her arm, and she sees this vision of a hospital with all sorts of, wires and cables and other stuff. And it's basically Rachel in the role of the little girl in this vision, and she snaps awake from there. So my question to you now is, how much of the phone call with her sister where she was coughing up the electrode, was that a dream, or was she actually coughing this thing up?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I don't think the movie wants you. I don't think. I think that's left to the imagination of the viewer, right?
Yeah, that's kind of perfect in that regard. It's I love when films do that where there is no clear answer.
Yeah.
It's you're supposed to draw your own conclusions with that. That's a very David Lynch thing to do. He loves doing that. He loves not spelling out, the actual plot. Shout out to Naomi Watts, and one of my favorite films of his, Mulholland Drive, came out like a year or two before this film. Gosh, she had a good run right around then. But yeah, I think that it very possibly could have all been a dream. But again, open to interpretation.
Yeah, I think this film too, in a variety of different ways, plays with the mental or the imagination versus the physical, and how those two intersect or cross over. So I to me, it just spoke to that, right? I mean, you see things down later in the movie, which I'm sure you'll get to, that sort of, talks about the physical versus the imagination. So
yeah, so much of this film is very dreamlike. It's love that. It's one of my favorite tropes. But yeah, she had snapped awake then, and she can hear the video with that sort of screeching ethereal music or soundscape or whatever. And she sees the light playing from underneath these pocket doors, and she slides those open. And of course, there's her son, Aiden, sitting in front of the TV. And it's the very end of the video with the well. But this time it is ever so slightly altered, and that you start seeing the hair coming up over the lip of the well.
Yeah.
And then it cuts to static, of course, and she screams no and grabs him and covers his eyes, of course, just like the original film. And very similarly, she's like, why were you watching this? And he's like, I couldn't sleep. And she, as all of this happens, she also stabs at the VCR and grabs the tape and throws it back, and it kind of slides its way under the couch. And you can see that this is the copy, because there is, of course, a big label on it, because, of course, she was trying to keep the two apart, and she put this, this copy label on the one so she'd have the original, so on and so forth. Don't want to get it mixed up, right? And yeah, I forget what exactly he says. Oh, also, when she snapped awake from this dream, she's got this sort of, yeah, it's not quite a burn and not quite a bruise. It's yeah. And I know what he is saying. He's like, who is she, Rachel? And I love that he calls her Rachel.
He never calls her mom.
No.
He does. He writes it on the drawing.
Yep. Yep. And I think he does call her mom towards the very end of the film. But yeah. And of course, the phone rings after he asks, and she picks it up and slams it back down. And then it rings right again after that, and she screams, leave him alone. But it's actually Noah this time. And this is where we finally get the confirmation that Noah is indeed Aiden's father. Because she tells him, our son watched the tape. And this is where he admits to her that he believes her as far as what's going on. And you see him in his car. He's on his cell. He's got all these photos that he's taken of himself, and they're all horribly distorted.
Yeah. Going
Uh,
back to the hand marks on
yeah.
her arm too. I mean, you see a lot of imagery in this movie of like burning thoughts into the physical,
Yes.
right? We don't really know what the tape is yet. I think it's, it starts becoming more implied. Like, you did it. It clearly was not recorded because there's not the timestamp. So what
Right.
was it? And then you see like her dream, like the dream of Samara, the child, getting burned onto her skin. And like there's just more and more examples of that as the film goes on.
Yep. Yep. It's oof. And very, very interesting ways in which Samara is manifesting her thoughts in the real world.
Exactly.
And we're going to get to those because they are varied. But yes, we cut to now Tuesday, day 6. And we've got Noah and Aiden alone in his car. They're in Ruth's driveway, and they've got this tense gunslinger style standoff of a conversation between the two of them, don't they?
They do.
Yeah, it's something of a heart to heart, but not because yeah.
Understanding.
Oh yeah, yeah. Noah's like, would you like me to be around more? And Aiden's like, no. Do you want to be around more? Wow. Twist that knife, kid. Just twist that knife. And Noah's like, well, the thing is, I don't think I'd be a good father. It's mostly because of my own father and my hangups with how he wasn't around and so on and so forth. But the thing is, I don't want anybody else to be your father. And Aiden's like, it's a conundrum. It's so good. It's so good. We cut to the house where Rachel's up in Katie's bedroom again, digging through her stuff, seeing what else she can find. And she digs a little bit further into this notebook and she sees all these drawings that Katie had made of the images from the video that are just in her head all the time. And it even says, why is this in my head? In case you didn't understand. But yeah, basically she's there to drop off Aiden, but also to do just a little bit more research. And then we get Noah and Rachel driving off to Moscow Island, and we get a hell of a lot of voiceover as they drive, because apparently they didn't shoot the conversation inside the car or something like that. I don't know. But I don't care because we get the awesome, awesome score playing as they drive. Basically, anytime there's establishing shots or, shots of people driving along. Yeah.
It's beautiful, like string instruments playing.
Oh yeah. You get all of that. And, the almost music box like portion of the score as well. It's fun. But in the voiceover, we learned that Anna Morgan, she just had this perfect life. She was, she and her husband were horse breeders, and, she just kind of rode horses and lived her best life. And then all of a sudden her life took this big left turn. She ended up in a mental hospital. And next thing you know, she committed suicide. So Rachel's going to go to the island to investigate there while Noah goes to the hospital she was in to see what he can dig up. And he tries to, get her to have him come along, but she's like, no, I need you to figure this stuff out. We're running out of time. We can't be two places, if we're together. So you do this, I'll do that. And she goes to get on the ferry, and we see the truck with the horse carrier behind it. And right before she gets on in the pouring rain, he hops out of the car and he passes off the drawing that Aiden had made for her before she left. And yes, it says mom right on the outside, and it's getting absolutely wrecked in that pouring rain, but we don't care because it's very sweet. Yes. So they part ways, and while on the ship, Rachel realizes that Anna Morgan had a daughter, as she's reading through some of these news clippings.
Mhm.
And, you see it on the page, but also you hear her say, she had a daughter. It's okay, little cheese ball there, but, just in case you didn't understand.
Pick it up. Mhm.
Yeah, but we're picking up what they're laying down. And then we get the horse bit.
So sad.
Yes. So sort of lost in thought as she's on this lawn ferry ride. Rachel walks through the garage area of the ship and she comes across the horse carrier and she starts talking to the horse and reaching out to it, which is so stupid. I don't know why you would do this. But the horse reacts very negatively to her.
And yet
because
she still kept trying.
Oh, I know. She's trying to calm the poor thing down and it's freaking out. It's kicking the walls of the carrier and just like punching out dents and everything else. And finally it breaks free. And you see one of the ferry attendants like, oh crap. And this horse is racing all over this place, running over cars and smashing windshields and stuff. And you see the people to whom the horse belongs and they're freaking out. And ultimately the horse charges Rachel, who's at the bow, at the front rail there. And she ducks down and the horse leaps over her, but catches one of its hind legs on the rail and hits several more bits of the ship as it goes down. And is this where we get the my horse? It's because the horse, of course, gets sucked under the ship as it's just screaming in this way that only horses can when it's rough. And everybody gathers at the stern and they're looking over the side there. And then the water churning up behind just turns red. And the little girl screams and the horn on the boat blasts for some reason. And I can imagine that Rachel ends up spending several hours with the local police on the island. I don't know, because somehow she just seems to get away with this, what has transpired, without having to deal with anything. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But holy crap, the horse bit is rough.
It's really rough.
But very memorable too. It's and this is where we get Noah getting to the hospital, and he asks the people to see Anna Morgan's records, and they're like, "No, you're not a family member. This is a mental health facility. The fuck you thinking?" And he's like, "Well, I just want to get up there to take a look." And of course, the dumbass attendant's like, "Oh, nice try, buddy. The records room's downstairs." Mm-hmm. Okay, this is a little cheese right here, but. Mm-hmm. And we just cut to outside where, Noah's got this pry bar and he's just breaking through this door and he's like, yeah, what does he say? Nice try, jerk off, or something like that. And he breaks in and starts looking around. And I think from there, we cut to the establishing shot of the island, kind of like a helicopter shot going over the lighthouse and everything. And again, the cool music box portion of the score playing. And Rachel gets dropped off at the Morgan farm, and she walks up to the door, doesn't get a response, but she finds Mr. Morgan, played by Brian Cox, working on a fence outside. And they talk a little bit, and she just kind of lets him assume that she's there to ask about the horses and what happened to them all those years ago. Mm-hmm. And he takes her inside, but it becomes very clear to him very quickly that she's not there to talk about the horses. And she starts asking more about his wife. We see the mirror that is in the other room, because basically everything that's in this video in the videotape does get a call back in the real world, because they're all things that Samara would have seen at one time or another. She thinks that this is a message from Anna Morgan. and he is very clearly aware of what the videotape is. And he just wants her to get out at this point. And this is where she asks him about his daughter as she's being shown out. And he just says, I don't have a daughter. Steps outside. She turns around and looks at the house, and we get the flash of Mr. Morgan standing at the window from the video as it lines up perfectly with the outside of the house. And then she realizes that the drawing that Aiden had given, that Aiden had given her, is this house. And she sees the the images on the drawing of course, the Morgans and their little girl. And yeah, let's see here. We've got Noah going through Anna's medical history at this point, which also has Samara's files with it for some reason. I'm not.
That was odd too.
Yeah, that's a little weird. And this is where we're introduced to these images that had somehow been projected. And they're, future spoilers here, but they're all images from her little bedroom. Basically all the things that she would be able to see from that horrible little space. And yeah, in the medical history, it's very clear that she had miscarried over and over and over. And what else?
Interesting. Sorry to interrupt you, but
no.
It's funny because the photos are in a file that talks about projected thermography, and
Yes.
I googled what that is, and it's actually psychic photography. So again, it's like a psychic thought burned onto something physical. So I think it's just, again, right.
Yeah, and it's interesting in what that is, but then also later when we get audio from the doctor who's talking to Samara about, we need to figure out what's wrong with you, he says.
Right.
And yeah, that's all very interesting. This is also where Noah starts getting his first nosebleed. I find it interesting that everybody starts to get a bloody nose about the same number of days into the process. It all
lines up.
Yeah, it all lines up. Let's see here. He also finds, in addition to those projected images, notes about a video that's stored elsewhere. And let's see here. Cut to Aiden at his aunt's house, obsessively drawing the well. And oof, it is dark and creepy. He gets a phone call from his mom, and she's asking about the house and his drawing. And he says that nobody told me about it. It's the little girl. She showed me. And then he mentions how she doesn't like it in the barn. The horses keep her up at night. And she asks, well, is that where she is now? And he's like, no, she's in the dark place now. Okay. Can read that several ways. This is where Rachel goes then to speak with the local doctor about the Morgans and their daughter. I love that the doctor just volunteers a lot of information that she probably shouldn't as a doctor, but small town, small island. Also, given everything that transpired on the island, I can see this playing out in this film the way it does. Sure. The Morgans couldn't conceive, she says, but they went away one winter and came back with an adopted daughter, and they never said adopted from where. Now, did I see like certificate of live birth later in this film? And so actually maybe not adopted. Somehow she did have this baby. I don't know.
So you still get a birth certificate if you adopt.
I guess. Yeah. Okay. That makes more sense. Okay. So who knows where this kid came from, but probably nowhere good. But yeah. What else does this doctor have to say? She
talked about her son, who clearly has some, is differently abled, and she kind of, implies that Samara had. She just wasn't normal. She had some challenges.
Yeah. Yeah, and eventually how Anna came to the doctor about the images being seared into her mind by her child.
Exactly.
And she was the one that ended up referring them to the psychiatric facility on the mainland. And when they left, they never saw the little girl again, and they were better for it. Because apparently there was a lot of misery on this island while that little girl was around. And Rachel presses, but yeah, the doctor's like, hey, I said what I said. And we move on from there. We've got Noah going after the videotape. This is a fun exchange between him and the orderly who manages this records room. Because Noah's trying to play himself off as being Richard Morgan, and this tape would have been from 1979. So, basically 23 years on at this point when this movie came out. And the guy's like, hey, what is your secret? And he's like, oh, diet and exercise. The guy's like, hey, I know what's going on here. You try to walk out with this video and, it's your ass. And they go and they find it. But of course, the case is empty. And it's like, does it say who last signed it out? And the guy's like, yeah, it was you. Cut to the little card and it does say Richard Morgan. Well, crap. Then we go to Noah. He's clearly on the ferry trying to get to the island. He's trying to call Rachel, but there's no cell service there, so he can't get through to her. Rachel's back at the Morgan house, and she just walks right in. She does call out for Mr. Morgan, but yeah, she just walks right into this place. And she ends up finding the missing tape and pops into the VCR. After getting scared by this nasty centipede that was, of course, in the video. And she also finds the record of Samara's birth and treatment in this box. And in the video, which of course she plays on the TV in the house that she should not be in. We get a video of Samara just not sleeping. And it's like time-lapse video of her just walking around her room, staring at the clock throughout the night. And then in interviews with Samara about, what she's done, how it's hurting her mother, how, she's, sorry, but not sorry. Kind of, it's, and the line from the doctor about, we got to figure out what's wrong with you. And, how ultimately she knows that her dad doesn't love her and he loves the horses, she said, which is probably why she ended up spooking them as much as she did to basically make them kill themselves. Cut to the video cutting out because we've got Mr. Morgan showing up and clocking Rachel and grabbing the TV and just ripping it out and carrying it upstairs. She kind of stumbles after him there. And he has rigged himself a little death trap in the bathroom. He's got the tub filled with water and just about every small appliance he could grab in the house so that he can stand in the water and flip the switch on a power strip and fry himself. She's pleading with him for help and making this stop, but he knows there's nothing to be done. There is no stopping this. He just wants to be done with things for himself at this point. And he flips the switch and it's gross. And she nearly fries herself standing in that water. But she gets away and he fries, she screams, and Noah just shows up out of the blue and grabs her. It's weird. But it's probably a good thing he's there because she's about to lose it. And this is where she remembers the thing about Samara not liking the barn. And they head out there, break in the door, and they find a child's room in the hayloft with the big, tall, long ladder leading up to it.
Mhm.
And yeah, basically everything we've been seeing in those thermography images and things in the video and so on are all like objects that are in this little room up there.
Mhm.
And we've even got a music box playing the little lullaby that Samara sings. Um, and this is where they find behind the peeling wallpaper an image of this maple on fire, basically burned into the boards.
Mhm.
And Rachel realizes that she's seen this tree before.
Mhm.
Not in the video though, but at Shelter Mountain.
Yep.
And now it's Wednesday, day 7. And we've got the establishing shots of them driving out there. And of course, the score kicks in because it's awesome. And we need to keep that happening.
Mhm.
And they make it to the inn, which apparently is closed for some reason. I don't
Mhm.
know if it's just like part of the season where they shut down or something like that. It's the Pacific Northwest. It's fairly temperate. I don't think you need to close down for the winter, but I don't know. But yeah, they make it to cabin 12 and they go inside, and she's a little despondent because here they are full circle. They're back to where she started and they haven't made any real headway. And he doesn't want to give up because he doesn't want her to die. He doesn't want to die. He doesn't want their son to die. And he starts raging a little bit as far as there's something in the phone. He rips it off the wall, and as he's thrashing around, he knocks over this vase that has a bunch of marbles in it, and they all kind of roll around the floor. And of course, they collect in the middle because the floor is sagging. And they
Mhm.
both stare at this and they're like, what? And they pull back the rug and they find this big ring of water damage. Um, it's so funny how many times throughout this film you see all these circular patterns.
Mhm.
They're everywhere.
Mhm.
If, not just the ring collecting there, not the ring itself, but you get coffee rings and all these other things everywhere. And I love it. Um, but yeah, he runs outside and grabs a fire axe and then goes all Jack Torrance on the floor. And that's where they find the covered well beneath.
Mhm.
And yeah, they go to push off the lid. And I mean, sunset's right around the corner. And it was just after 5 when she played that tape to begin with. And as they're shining their flashlights down the well and looking around, the TV starts flickering to life and water starts flowing from underneath it. And you see all the fasteners from the floorboards start lifting themselves out, and the big bolts going through the joists under the floor and everything, just of their own accord, of course.
Mhm.
And Noah's like, well, should we drop something? Trying to figure out how far down it goes. And of course, she drops a stone down there. It's like, what is that? And all these flies just burst out, and they're all flailing around and everything. And it's right at this moment where the floor collapses into this ramp, and the TV with a burst of static on it flies down and smashes into her and knocks her into the well. And yeah, she takes a tumble there, and Noah calls after her, and she kind of wakes up with her face in the water. Thank God she wakes up. And calls back to him that she's okay, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna find her a rope or something because we got to get you out of there." And this is where she starts looking around the well with her flashlight, which thankfully fell down there with her. And she sees all the scratches and claw marks in the stone, and they're bloody, and there are fingernails, yes, everywhere. And of course, she picks one out and looks at it because, of course, she has to. That's gross. And we've got Noah outside. He finds a fire hose and decides, hey, that'll be perfect to use as a rope. And we get the comedic bit of him running that thing towards the cabin. And of course, it hits the end of the line. It rips his feet out from under him. And as all this is happening, the lid is sliding closed over the well of its own accord. And he realizes it's sunset and he kind of screams at the setting sun. And down in the water, Samara kind of reaches out of the water and grabs Rachel's arm, and we get another vision. And this time it's of her death. She's standing at that well, kind of, sing-songing her little lullaby from her room. And her mother steps up behind her, talking about how beautiful the place is. And next thing you know, she's got a trash bag over the girl's face. And it's pretty horrific. We get a "all I ever wanted was you" right before she throws her down the well. That's heartbreaking. Oh, God.
Heartbreaking.
I mean, I understand that her mother is absolutely broken at this point. She's spent some time in psychiatric care. She's had to deal with everything that her daughter is feeding her mind. But also, you're killing your kid. That's wow.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, cut back to Rachel in the well, and the burn mark fades away from her arm. And this is where she realizes that Samara was alive in the well down there. And we've got the little girl's body floating back to the surface, and she looks just like she was when she fell down there. And she sort of cradles her, and the body just sort of decays before her eyes into a corpse. And we hear Noah from up above, that it's past sunset, and she realizes that she's still alive. So one way or another, they get her out of there, and we cut to, it's evening, and the police and fire department are there, and it's over, right? We've got something of a resolution. The typical shot of the couple there. She's got a blanket over her, and she's just kind of musing about Anna killing Samara, how she just can't really get over it. It's she's a mother herself, and it's horrific to her. And it's horrific to most people, but of course she's got a fairly strong connection to all of this. Mm-hmm. And Noah comforts her, and he just kind of wonders aloud how long you could survive alive in that well. Mm-hmm. And 7 days. It all, again, comes full circle. Mm-hmm. And they kind of fade away from Shelter Mountain and cut to Rachel. We're back at Ruth's house, and Aiden is passed out in his PJs on the floor in the most dead body pose ever.
Well, and Rachel thinks she's solved the problem because she is able to, they're able to bury Samara's remains, and
they make a comment about how they're going to bury the body in about a week or whatever.
To rest, right?
Yeah, they've got some resolution.
I've saved her. I've solved the problem. I've solved the crime.
It's so weird how this little kid is laid out on the floor, though. And she just kind of scoops him up. And, next thing you know, he's waking up in the back seat, and he sees his parents smiling at each other, and they hold hands, and he kind of drifts off again. And after she tucks Aiden in, she sees Noah out, and there's a very sweet exchange between the two of them, about how, he would like to see her again, and how, he kind of wants to be in their lives again. And it's pretty touching. She goes to wash off the filth of the day from there, and it's just black running down the drain. And of course, again, the circular motion, the more rings. But yeah, we go to the next day, and Aiden's waking up to his mom holding him, and they kind of sleepily talk to each other there, and she tells him that it's over, and they set Samara free. This is where he bolts upright, and his eyes are just as big as they possibly can be. He's like, you weren't supposed to do that. You weren't supposed to help her. It's like, well, you could have told us that, kid. God. But ultimately, yeah, she notices that there's the mark on his arm still, and this is where his nose starts bleeding like a fire hose. And we go right from there to Noah's loft, where he's looking through some photos on a project, and in the background, his TV pops on. And he's got his little roller chair that he's in. He just kind of slides out to get a better view. And he steps up and walks up to it's kind of like a little bit of an elevated platform where he's got his TV and like a couch and another swivel chair. I like that chair. It's really cool. But he grabs the remote and turns off the TV. And of course it pops back on, and it's the image of the well with the sound from the video playing. And we've got Rachel jamming all the Kleenex that she can into Aiden's face, and she's calling Noah, and she realizes, okay, she's just got to go over there. And we're back then to Noah's loft, and we've got the shot of the back of the TV, and water is pouring off the sides of the TV. And this is where Samara has been slowly walking towards the screen, and she starts to emerge. And Rachel nearly kills all of Seattle driving to the loft at this point. She's like going down one-way streets and everything else. It's she's got her cell phone and he's just not picking up. And you've got the rising tension of the two planes of action, but also you've got the little screeing sound of the soundscape of the video playing, and you've got Samara coming out of the TV, and you got the phone ringing in the background. It's this perfect mix of tension. It's very, very good. She fully makes her way out of the TV and starts to stand up, and then does this shift where she just bolts forward and of course scares him backwards off of this platform, because of course it's elevated, right? Through this rack storage that has like all the glassware in the entire place. He crashes through that and rolls off. And of course he's got to crawl through broken glass trying to get away from her. Finally he gets far enough away that he looks back, and she just stands there and finally looks up through the hair that hangs over her face that I don't think we've really brought up yet in this conversation. But this is where the hair sort of parts and you see her eye, and she glares at him, and we get his face as, of course, he expires. And this is, where Rachel pulls up outside and races into the home, and the music is pounding, and she's got her phone still calling him, and she can't wait for the elevator because it's going to take forever to come down. So she races up the stairwell and bursts into his place, and the phone's still ringing in the background, and you hear it through her phone as well. And she finally hangs up, and she can see him from behind sitting in this chair, and there's a pool of water all around it. And she approaches and swivels the chair around. And of course, we don't get to see, but we hear her scream and see her reaction. And steps out into the stairwell, just totally in shock. And she looks down the stairwell and sees the assistant at the elevator. And she just kind of makes herself as small as possible and works her way into a corner as the assistant goes up and just kind of scoots on out of there. That's going to be a super fun shock for the assistant. Also, she looks down. She still has one of the bloody tissues from Aiden in her hand. And she realizes, crap, she's got to get home. She bursts into that apartment and screams at him to go to his room. And his eyes get so big when she does that. And they kind of go their separate ways, and she almost runs over him as he's running. And she grabs the videotape and smashes it to the floor, just screaming about, what am I supposed to do? And she ends up throwing it onto the gas log and torching it. And, she's wondering aloud, what did she do differently? And this is where we get sort of a montage of, snippets throughout the film, explaining, who Samara was, what she was doing, what was done to her. And I think even Brian Cox talking about journalists at the time and how they kind of help bring up everybody's misery and kind of keep sending it out into the world, except that is exactly what Samara is doing. She's sort of broadcasting her misery out into the world. And then Rachel realizes she made a copy. She helped spread it. This is what saved her ultimately. And we cut to her with Aiden at her work, and she's helping him pop tapes in so that they can make a copy. And, he wonders aloud, what's going to happen to whoever they show it to. And I feel like there's a deleted scene of them showing it to the babysitter or something like that, or at least implying that they're going to be showing it to the babysitter, which is horrible. What did she ever do? But we
in the Japanese movie, she was going to show it to her father.
Yeah. But in the Japanese version too, it just kind of ends with her driving off to go save the day and storm clouds in the distance, which is kind of a cool ending. But we cut from his question to the ring itself and static, and then the stinger of images from the tape before we get to credits with the amazing score.
So good.
Okay. I can't remember if there's any sound or anything at the end of the credits, but I don't think there is. I know there's no like post credits thing itself, but yeah, what a banger of a film.
And it really, I was so impressed with all of the details that they picked and tied together. They wrapped a bow around it at the end. It was really
wonderful. Oh yeah. God, is there anything that we didn't talk about with this film that's on your mind? Because I know, like me, you watched this film probably a couple of times this week, as well as Ringu. And just.
I mean, all I can say is the score. I know you've called it out, but it's just, there's like this interplay between deep strings and then like lonely, sad piano keys, with this really sort of like sweet, innocent, sort of sad, melancholy vibe. And you like have the tension between the two for the whole film. So it really sort of plays on that sort of dichotomy for Samara, right? Like she's this cute little kid turned quite evil. So the score kind of just underlines all of that.
Yep. It's such a fun back and forth. And it's honestly one of the great horror scores that I don't hear people talk about enough, honestly.
So dramatic. It's awesome.
Yeah. And I also get it. It's a 20-year-old film at this point. I think maybe we'll get to this point like, a lot of the films from the 70s and 80s that people started gaining more respect for in the 90s and the aughts.
Right.
We'll get to a point with a film like this, even though it is a remake. We're going to have plenty of people talking about this for time to come. It's very, very strong performances out of the cast. I don't think you could have found a more perfect fit for this kid. I can't remember the actors.
Either of them, right? The boy or Samara or the girl.
Yep. Yeah, Devai Chase. She's gone on to do some other things. She was in the sequel to Donnie Darko, which is not good. is not good. But she's done plenty of other stuff, and Naomi Watts is really good in this too. It's shout out to the lady who plays, the main character in the original. And, of course, we talked about Sonata as her counterpart there.
Yeah.
They're great. They're fantastic. But the casting in this is so good. And Brian Cox is the father. He's Brian Cox doing a Brian Cox role, but it is kind of perfect as well.
Yeah,
I wish we had gotten just the tiniest bit more of Anna Morgan and what she was going through. But like we talked about with the dreamlike nature of this film, I think that does help to kind of, keep it fairly open to interpretation and fairly open as far as your imagination goes, as far as what actually transpired with everything on that island.
Agreed.
I know there's, a couple of American sequels. I never saw the third one.
I didn't either.
Yeah, I did not hear good things. And the second one, while it's fun, it just pales in comparison to the original here. Yeah, this is it's a gem. I can't believe that it's 21 years old.
I know.
We are all advancing in age faster than I would like, but yeah, I mean the fun thing about that is, movies continue to come out that are fantastic, and we will look back in time as great classics. Just this past couple of weeks, that Australian horror film Talk to Me. It is so good. You got to check this out when you get a moment. That's one that will be talked about years down the road for sure. But yeah, Kate, thank you for coming on. I can't imagine a better person to talk about this film with. This was a lot of fun. And we had talked about potentially doing Saw at some point, because I know how much you love those films as well, particularly the first one. It's a fun one, and I think a lot less torture porny than the rest of the sequels tend to become. That is not my favorite subgenre.
Yeah, it was as a mind thriller as it was like the grandfather to torture porn. So
yeah. So ultimately, that would be a fun one to do. We'll have to see what we can do about making that happen.
I love it.
Yeah, if you'd like, where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram. My my Instagram name is See the Stars Backwards.
There we go. And I'll go ahead and drop that in the notes on the video. But yeah, thanks again for being on.
Thanks for having me. It was great to see you.
Oh, good to see you as well. And this has been Murders with Mertens, a horror film podcast. Thank you for letting us tickle your ear holes. Please like, share, and subscribe if you are so inclined. I'll be back soon enough with another episode. But until next time, stay spoopy, everyone.